Welcome to the SDA Housing Podcast, brought to you by NDIS Property Australia. Before starting this episode, we need to provide a general disclaimer. Information contained in this podcast is general in nature only. It does not take into account the objectives, financial situation, or needs of any particular person. You need to consider your financial situation and needs before making any decisions based on the information in this podcast. And you should consider seeking independent and professional advice for your personal circumstances. All right, let's begin.
Hello, everybody. My name is Min, and I'm your host from NDIS Property Australia. And you listen to the SDA Housing Podcast, a show that explains, highlights, guides, and brings awareness about all things SDA in this ever-changing NDIS world. Welcome, Mr. Dr. Angad Singh. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you, Min. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure as always.
We're going to talk faster there because there's so much to unpack.
Oh, man, it's unreal.
So
unreal.
I'm going to talk faster than normal, so will you. Mate, what's going on? What's this crazy thing about the NDIS SDA price guide reviews?
Mate, I'm sure you've seen it, right? So the NDIA has just released their comprehensive 5-year review for the recommendations of the SDA benchmarks. What that means is essentially the recommendation for what the SDA income should change to. And if you haven't already read the report, read the report. There is a lot of information in there to unpack and significant changes that need to be understood for all investors moving forward.
Great. Let's go back to the last 6 to 8 months.
Right.
What have you and I been going on about for the last 10 months or so? What are we talking about?
Look, we have been talking about Class 3 construction, 2-participant homes, building in big blocks of land, high-quality design, private courtyards, building to multiple design categories, and allowing for that improved livability component. So, yeah, I guess in many ways this has validated everything we've been talking about, hasn't it?
It certainly has. I mean, at some point, Angad, I was feeling like you and I were the only two guys on this little island called the future of the SDA.
Yeah.
And people were still going on about HPS is the way to go. The big house with 4-bedroom, 4-bathroom, 2-car.
Yeah.
3 HPS participants is the way to go and blah, blah, blah.
Mm-hmm.
And even I thought, geez, maybe we are wrong, Angad. Maybe we're going too far ahead of ourselves. And is this the right way to go about this? And we came to this conclusion 6 to 9 months ago because we looked at the data, we looked at the research, we looked at the problems, we looked at what everyone else is doing out there, and we saw that there was a big gap in the marketplace because
absolutely
to research anything, you got to do the research, due diligence, the analysis.
Mm-hmm.
You got to study the numbers, and too many people were both builders, developers, and investors were so focused on returns, yields, and they weren't worried about or understanding the risks component of this all. So you and I discussed so many times the importance of IL, two participants, and a Class 3. And here we are now with the recommended changes.
Yeah.
Right. And even though my last episode with Debbie, she says it's not set in concrete and blah, blah, blah. Listen, it came out on an NDIS document.
Yes.
They've had a lot of input.
They have.
With these stakeholders who've contributed to the recommendations. I would say this is 90% complete, 95% complete, ready to go. That they would not have released the document out this close to July 1 if there was going to be major changes next few months. No. So Debbie's right. It's not set in stone until 1st of October. Yes, correct. But it's almost finished. It's been a year or so of hard work of recommendations. And
it would be a surprise to see changes from here.
Yes.
Or significant changes from here, I should say.
So the question now is, Angad, where to from here for you and I and those of us who are riding the wave in advance already?
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
What have you put together on your books?
Yeah.
Has these changes from the SDA perspective, SDA pricing changes, recommended changes, sorry, have they altered what you're currently doing already, or really enhance and giving you reassurance of what's going to come forward with?
Yeah. Look, to be honest, in many ways, nothing has changed here at SADHANA Constructions. And the reason is because we were already doing what you and I have been talking about, right? Now, there are very clear winners and losers in this report, and I think people need to understand that. The funding for apartments has gone down significantly, particularly in the HPS space. The largest increases are seen in 2-participant homes and massive increases. So, for example, a 2-participant home previously, I think for IL was generating circa 70, 75,000 bucks. And now it's generating about 170 or 180,000 bucks. So that is almost a tripling. A tripling.
Let's go over to the facts. A year ago, you and I were doing Kelmscott, for example.
Yes.
Kelmscott is southeast in Perth.
Check out that podcast about a year ago now. Maybe more, Min. Maybe it's more than a year ago.
It was all about IL in Perth. And we did the numbers. It's like if we had 2 IL participants in a 4-bedroom house, it will be about 65 to 70, 67, 68 grand, 68 grand for 2 participants for IL.
Yep.
If it was 3 participants in the southeast sector of Perth, we're talking about 93 to 95,000 for 3 IL participants.
That's right.
In a 4-bedroom house. Now let's compare that to a different 3-bedroom house, IL, in southeast Perth.
Yeah.
A location factor of 1.08.
Yeah.
And both of them had fire sprinklers, by the way.
Yeah.
Both of them were class 3. We're now looking at 180 grand rent for a 2-resident IL versus a 68 grand. Is almost triple. Is it triple? It is?
Well, it is. It's triple. Yeah. 60 to 180 is bang on triple, right?
And this is before the CPI for next year in April.
Yeah. So look, let's be clear about this though, yeah? So it's not just about the returns. And we have to also acknowledge that the way this recommendation, the methodology applied by the NDIA is really about understanding the cost of the dwellings. They're not trying to signal to the market what you should do. That knowing what you should do is really up to the investors to make sensible decisions based on other market factors, such as what do participants need and want. And what's really interesting is back then, Min, you might remember we were doing lots of ILs, and I actually feel like we were doing 2-participant homes when everyone else was doing 3-participant homes. And I felt like we were being punished, because we were really struggling to sell our 2-participant homes because the 3-participant homes on paper looked like they'll do so much better. We were doing ILs and we felt like we were being punished for it, even though reports from all of our SEAL providers and SDA providers were telling us that's where the demand is. We were doing class 3 fire sprinklers. Our homes, costing an extra $150,000 on some occasions and getting essentially no benefit for that. So I really feel like, whilst these incomes have increased so dramatically, one thing that we need to be conscious of is they're not telling us what to do next. What they are telling us, I feel like they've stopped punishing us for the things that we have been doing right. Do you know what I mean?
Totally agree. We've been released from prison.
We've been released. Yes.
That's innocent.
Yeah. And one thing about this, right? So one of the great benefits of the new funding amounts is what it should do is it should actually expand the capacity to improve the quality of SDA delivery, right? It's not just about trying to make now a much higher return for investors, although that is the consequence of these. One thing that we can see very clearly and is that the 2-participant homes, they have normalized for the cost, the returns. So now if someone is engaging in that type of product, which is the product that is most in demand, they are going to be rewarded as they would have had they built a 1-bedroom apartment, right? So they're going to achieve a similar level of return. Before, 1-bedroom HPS apartments were through the roof and 2-participant homes felt like the poor cousin of the investments, didn't it?
So can you refresh our listeners the price increase in the last year or 2 years on land and build across the industry, please?
Look, that's highly specific to location. I think the report says some specific numbers. In Perth, I can tell you land has probably gone up around 10 to 12% over the last 2 years, maybe slightly more.
30 to 50% increase in land prices, yeah, but the cost of land as the whole package is probably about 50 to 60% of the whole aggregate cost, yeah.
Yeah. So the report says that the increase in land over the last 5 years has been around 60 to 70%. Noting that WA and Northern Territory had very little increases. So poor little Perth over here didn't get a lot of growth in terms of the land. However, that's probably going to change over the next 5 years. I expect it'll be the reverse. Perth will probably show some of the largest growth in terms of the land values.
Gotcha. In the past, if you had 2 or 3 tenants, you're getting roughly a grand, slightly over $1,000 per year per person in the house. Now it's $5,000 per person in this 2-tenant house in Southeast Perth, with a location factor of 1.08.
Yeah. Which to me, honestly, is still not enough. I feel like the sprinkler needs to be more. What's interesting to me, if you read the report, once again, what it says is that the construction costs, by the way, which seem very high, most of the house and land packages that you see, the construction costs will be far lower than what numbers are in that report. And there's a couple of reasons for that. The first reason for that is the government always tends to be conservative with their construction budgets. And the second reason is most of the packages that are out there are class 1. Yeah. Now, the assumption of this report is that the construction standard should be a class 3 residential care building, which is, as you and I have discussed in a previous podcast, check that out if you haven't already. The construction cost of class 3 is significantly higher, right? And I feel like it's very strange that they're distinguishing between fire sprinklers and not fire sprinklers, but assuming that they're both class 3, which is impossible. Yeah. If you are doing class 3 residential care buildings, fire sprinklers are required by law, full stop, right? So the construction costs that they've got in there are far too high for a class 1, reasonable for a class 3, but the specific allowance for sprinklers I still feel like is too low.
Yep, totally agree. Again, these are recommendations. At least it's a step in the right direction.
Yeah, 100% step in the right direction, I would say.
Because this document, this paper, it talks a lot about fire sprinklers.
It does.
It's mentioned a lot, and it's implying long term there's going to be a massive mandate change. That's what I think. Yeah.
Yeah. So now look, they're obviously smart people, right? So the fact that they have made the assumption that they're going to be class 3 residential care buildings as the baseline, I think is a signal. And I think that should be taken very seriously. What we have seen, by the way, is this is for dwellings that are enrolled after July 1, 2023. So it's quite likely that at some point in the future, we will see that fire sprinklers and possibly even class 3 will become mandated. And it will be interesting because they also have suggested, which I think is a fantastic thing, that the NDIA start working with the Australian Building Codes Board to help understand this very specific type of construction and separate it from, something that's like a 10-person residential care building and have specific requirements for a residential care building of this small scale and make it more homely in nature, right?
Okay. I want to ask you a question now.
Sure, brother.
In the past, we talked about NCC, National Construction Code,
yes,
the SDA Building Guidelines, as you all know about, and now they're throwing in the word ABC, Australian Building Code. What's this ABC mean?
Sure, good question. So the NCC is the National Construction Code. That's essentially the technical document that outlines what you need to do, right? The ABCB is the Australian Building Codes Board. They are responsible for writing the NCC. So the way to think about it is the NDIS, for example, is the document, is the scheme, and the NDIA is the association which manages the scheme. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So the ABCB manages the NCC.
Gotcha. In the recommendations, it said even though the NDIA should not be responsible for mandating whether it's going to be fire sprinklers or not, it recommends the NCC and ACB should be
looks at it.
Yeah.
Look, and that's true, right? So it's not their hill to die on. I don't think. I think what these people are doing in this report is that they're looking at the cost assumptions broadly, and they're generalists in nature. They're looking at many different factors. This is a highly specific technical construction issue that needs to be addressed by construction experts, right? And frankly, I think the only mistake or the largest mistake that they've made is they've assumed everything is class 3 and then sprinklers and not sprinklers, when really it should have been class 1 without sprinklers or class 3 with sprinklers. And I think that if you had that type of distinction, you would see massive, massive differences in the benchmark incomes. What will need to happen is, like with all new things, the Building Codes Board will need to really have a think about this particular typology of building, right? So do we need sprinklers or not? There needs to be a decision made on that. Frankly, the way the NCC is written today, it's my view that they fall squarely in the category of a class 3 residential care building, and it's almost impossible to come to any other view if you read the NCC plainly. However, I also acknowledge that class 3 residential care buildings are probably not the most homely and welcoming buildings to live in. And so maybe some modifications need to be made to the actual NCC to really give people that are living in these residential care buildings both the amenity and safety, but also the homeliness that we would expect from a residential dwelling. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, gotcha. No, well, there have been mixed views about the sprinklers in this SDA.
There has been.
Concerns that the inclusion of the sprinklers may reduce the amenity and lead to more institutionalized setting for SDA, as you say, versus ethical review.
Yeah.
the current allowance as of now, or as of currently, is 1.2% of the total building costs for apartments.
Yeah.
And 1.9% of the total build cost for other build types. And this is insufficient to cover the cost of installing fire sprinklers. So now there's a change as to how the costs associated with the provision of fire sprinklers are considered, which has been added to the number of the new price tables. So
or maybe let's be more clear, right? What I'm not saying is that the cost of sprinklers is overstated or the cost of maintenance of sprinklers is overstated. What I am saying is that the cost of homes without sprinklers, they're still assumed to be class 3. So the cost of homes without sprinklers is way overstated, right? If we built a class 1 home without fire sprinklers, it would be a lot less than a class 3 home with fire sprinklers, right? So what I really think they should have done is the homes without sprinklers should be a lot lower than the homes with sprinklers, because the distinction is not really sprinklers or otherwise, it's class 3 or class 1. And we would expect to see at least a 15% difference between class 1 costs and class 3 costs. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Rather than focusing on this narrow issue of sprinklers, the broader issue, which includes sprinklers, is actually the class 1 versus class 3.
Gotcha.
And that's where the distinction should be.
Cool. I'll put a stop right there. We've had this discussion so many times now.
Yeah, man. Yeah, go back and read the previous podcast or listen to the previous podcast.
Moving on, I want to talk about just for 3-4 minutes, GST.
Yes,
so the GST cost is mentioned quite a lot in the tables there. The GST paid, claimed, not claimed. I just want to read something here of another document I have in front of me. It says, currently GST credits can only be claimed by SDA providers and not by developers, owners, self-providers and investors who are not registered SDA providers. Determining exactly what the SDA price is applicable to each dwelling has become a little bit more complicated now due to the welcomed change that sees SDA prices from July 1, 2023 to take into account the GST position. What's your feedback on the GST matter now, regarding all this?
Look, it's unusual, right? It's unusual that they will distinguish between the tax status of the owners. However, what I would say is this: SDA income is actually classified as a medical support. So it's a GST-free income. Now, I didn't know, or I'm not sure, you have to speak to a tax accountant about the very specifics around the nuances of GST, a very complicated subject, and you have to get personalized advice on that. However, there was recently, maybe not, I think in 2021, a ministerial decision which confirmed that SDA income is actually GST-free. So I don't know who can and who can't claim GST. Certainly the people that I work with mostly are commercial entities and they do claim back the GST. I know a lot of mum and dads, however, simply cannot. So maybe this will at least allow the mum and dads to get a similar return to what a commercial entity might get otherwise.
If you're a mum and dad investor buying in your personal names, you're not going to claim the GST refund. If you are buying via family trust, discretionary trust or entity, you can claim that GST back from the bill cost there.
Potentially, yeah. Speak to your accountant. This is a very, very nuanced tax advice. Yeah.
Well, moving on. GST done, sprinklers done. What other major issues should we cover in this podcast?
Mate, I think what we have to see is the big winner in this is the high quality 2-participant home. Yeah. And I think what we have to also acknowledge is, to me, the biggest loser in this is actually the robust category. Now, the robust category is interesting because if you speak to providers in the space, people who care for people that have the types of conditions that you would expect to see in robust dwellings, what you see is that really the only viable typology for a robust is a single participant villa. Yeah. Anecdotally, I mean, I'd say 90% of the providers that I've dealt with that work with people who in the robust categories have said they would never put more than one participant in a home. And given that apartments are out of the question, and given that there's no category for a single participant house, what that means is that the only available category for these people is a single participant robust villa. We've actually got 7 or 8 under construction at the moment, or in the stages of construction. And I really feel like the income increase in that has not been sufficient. And I feel like that hasn't really supported those people. And especially in that small section, I feel like that's the section where they need most of the help. Right? Now, it's possible they'll address this in a limited review at a future state. However, I really feel like that's something that needs to be brought to the surface and people need to start acknowledging and taking care of.
I totally agree with everything you've said.
Mm-hmm.
But
But
putting the hat of a government representative on board or my head representing the NDIA, I would argue with you otherwise, saying the following. I would say to you, well, Mr. Investor, the SDA price changes have increased slightly for robust.
Mm-hmm.
For one resident, yes, we know there's no one resident housing. We know that.
Mm-hmm.
But for a robust participant, their income is now between 85 to 95,000 a year for the SDA funding for robust category. Now, there's only so much we can pay for one resident SDA funding. I mean, if you're not happy at 95,000, what would you be happy with? 110, 120, 130? That seems a little bit ludicrous to actually pay that kind of money for one person living in a house or a villa here. Is it not, Mr. Investor? That's how I would respond as a critic to what you just said.
Yeah, sure. So look, again, what they are fundamentally doing is they are looking at the cost of creation, like the cost of creating the product that they need. Because remember, the outcome of not having people in suitable accommodation is dire. Yeah. So they have to acknowledge that we need accommodation for robust. We need it. Yeah. So they have to look at the costs of that construction and that dwelling, both in acquisition and in ongoing costs. And they have to provide investors with an appropriate return. What I'm seeing at the moment is that the return of a robust compared to an IL, for example, is the differential is insufficient to justify ever building a robust villa. Yeah. We're doing it because it's not just the money, right? Like the money is great, but it's not just the money. If people need robust accommodation, we're builders, we have to build it. Otherwise, where are these people going to live? Do you get me? And I do feel like this was the same with IL, by the way. And you saw what happened with IL. When there was an enormous demand and the market wasn't serving it, the NDIA came out with a review, which we've just seen, where they've significantly incentivized people to do that, right? I suspect they'll do the same with robust in the future, simply acknowledging that there has to be a difference between what an IL participant gets and what a robust participant gets, given the difference in cost of creation and ongoing costs of the two categories, right?
I agree. I would dare say in the future, maybe 5 years from now, if not earlier, we might see a bump up of the robust funding to entice investors to go back into robust and a decrease of HPS. Again.
Yes, it's definitely possible.
Because
possible.
With time and volume and saturation is the key word here, the possibility of the market requiring less HPS dwellings is going to be an issue, an important issue, as in we don't need as many more HPS anymore. Let's reduce the funding and let's increase HPS.
Yeah.
And look, robust. Yeah.
Yeah. One thing to remember. So what do these prices actually do? So right now, if you look at currently what typical 2-participant home will get, for an IL, it will get around 70,000. And for a HPS, it'll get around 120,000 typically, right? With the new prices, that goes from what is currently 60 to 120,000, depending on the participant split. It goes to 180 to 215,000. Yeah. So you're getting a big increase in the ceiling, but you're getting an even bigger increase in the floor. Does that make sense? So what it means is that whatever you design to, having even IL will be a great outcome for investors. Yeah. Now that's not saying that you should only design for IL. What that's saying is if you do design for high physical support and you have someone that's living in there that's currently IL, that you're still doing very well. Does that make sense? And I think that's very important because remember, anecdotally, again, speaking to providers, around 60% of disabilities are degenerative. So you expect someone who starts as IL will then turn into FA and possibly HPS. So what you really want to do is create an environment where someone can move in and live long term and not have to leave because all of a sudden their disability has gotten worse and now their accommodation is no longer suitable. So I guess what it really does is it allows people to build to that HPS standard and then not be penalized when they take someone in who might currently be IL but might be moving down that path towards HPS.
Yep, totally agree. I want to go off track a little bit here.
Sure, buddy.
The report talks about a few things that need to stand out here in this conversation. Location factor.
Yep.
Maintenance costs, ongoing costs, land pricing, build pricing, and fire sprinkler costs.
Yeah.
So it talks in detail these matters, which has never been done before. Now, I want to remind our listeners here that if someone says to me right now off the street, oh, well, isn't it a bit silly that the government's increasing all these funding from this to 100, 200 grand a year? Well, guess what? The land price and build prices of construction costs have gone up so much that the increase in funding is to cover those costs.
Yeah.
Right? And to cover those costs that have occurred the last 2-3 years of inflation. Now, where the NDIA is proposed is going to make these changes with regards to income is the location factor.
Mm-hmm.
Angad, what is your impression of their, I have no other word other than manipulations, their massaging of the location factor numbers implied or what's the word, implications to the movement of investors around the marketplace?
Mm-hmm. Look, I think they've obviously tried to price in the additional cost of land, and they've tried to do that via the location factors. I think they've done a reasonable job. And again, I think what they're trying to do is not penalize people for trying to do a better job. So let's just say someone wants to go and build out 30 Ks from the CBD, they might get a location factor of 1. And now someone wants to build inner Perth, they might get a location factor of, I think it's 1.25 or something, right? And I think that's great, because it means that the investors are not being penalized for trying to produce high quality SDA. Now, the problem, I think, with the location factors is that the statistical areas are just too large. Yeah, like they're massive. And you could literally have in the same statistical area a block of land worth $1 million and a block of land worth $300,000 in the same statistical area. So I feel like the location factors, I think they've done a pretty good job with what they have done, but they're quite limited in that it's a very blunt instrument for actually understanding land values. Do you know what I mean?
Yes, totally. But yeah, at least this explains to people why the numbers are so massive. When I speak to some clients recently in the last few days, they're just shocked at the massive numbers now. Yeah. Double, triple the numbers. Yeah.
But I mean, you said it right before, right? So remember when we've been doing this for about 4 or 5 years now, right? This is what SDA looked like 5 years ago. These are the returns that we were seeing 5 years ago. Yeah, do you remember?
Yeah, exactly.
So SDA kind of goes in waves, yeah? And at the top of the wave, when they release these pricing figures, they seem quite aggressive in what they're doing. And then what happens is over time, competition strikes and this happens and that happens and risk changes and all the rest. And then eventually where we were, 6 months ago is we're like, look, I can't justify anyone building an IL home. It doesn't really stack, where interest rates were, much higher now than they were before. So what had happened is that the SDA returns over the previous 5 years have really been eroded. They kind of started similar to this report, and then they were eroded away. What this report has done, and this is why they do a report every 5 years, they've taken that into consideration and almost done a reset. Here, this is where we should be now to provide the returns that we need to incentivize investors to get into the marketplace again.
Yes. With the, I think with the next 5 years with the CPI increases and also land prices coming back down, hopefully, cost of construction stabilizing with labor costs, and the next 5-year review, I think the next reset will be perfectly fine as well.
Yeah. You have to have some trust in the people, that are conducting these reviews, that they have a good head on their shoulders and that they're taking the submission seriously and that they're going to make good decisions about the NDIS in the future.
The other thing is interest rates, serviceability of home loans.
Yes.
In the past, I mean, we've been privy and part of these processes. Our office here, the valuers issue us a request to do a SDA income forecast.
Yep.
And we always base it on usually they're always 4-bedroom homes, but on 3 tenant HPSs on the house, on the property. And that's what they use for the valuation. I'm sure now with the way the interest rates are, with possible more increases, they're going to be taking account more of a tenancy mix like IL or ILFA and whatnot, rather than always HPSs. And what we're seeing now with these numbers are IL is almost the same as FA.
Yeah, exactly.
It was almost the same as HPS, which means basically the serviceability is now stronger for those investors who have a lower income salary to use for their serviceability for the home loan.
Yeah. The serviceability should be easier. The valuation should be easier. The risk, in my view, is also lower because you're not relying on getting HPS clients. It's nice if you get them, but honestly, if you get 3 ILs or even 2 ILs, it's actually totally fine. So I think overall, this is very positive for investors.
Speaking of location factor, I mean, you and I are working on a client right now, dealing at, Marmadale versus North Perth in, I think, Midvale. Midvale, is that right?
Yeah. That's right.
The location factor for Armadale is 1.08, but the location factor up north was 0.98.
Yeah, 0.94, I think.
0.94, a difference of 14%. Now, that 14% difference really is on a 180 IL scenario or a HPS scenario. That is 14% on 200 is almost
significant.
30 grand.
25 grand, yeah.
25 to 30 grand.
Yeah.
Now, can I ask you, why do you think the location factor is such a big difference between the two, North Midvale and Armidale in Perth there?
Yeah, honestly speaking, man, I think it's a bug. Yeah, I don't think that's by design. I think that's by accident. So let me be clear. The statistical areas for the Northeast and Southeast are massive. Yeah. And because of that, the statistical area, the valuation that they have for land in the Southeast versus land in the Northeast is significantly different. Having said that, the land value in those particular areas is actually quite similar. So I think, as I was saying with you before, the location factors are quite blunt instruments. They don't necessarily take into account the specific block in the specific suburb. They take a very large statistical area and try to apply some sort of multiplier on top of that. I think that this particular client that we're dealing with is very sophisticated, very intelligent, and they are looking at what I think is more important, which is overall participant demand and the quality of the providers available to them at each of the locations. So if I was an investor right now, you got to start with the users. You got to start with the participants and make your decision based mostly on where you believe your asset will serve the participants the best, rather than trying to manipulate 1.25 or 1.08 or whatever it is, simply because you're trying to make a spreadsheet work. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
That's why I think those numbers are different, but I really think that those two locations are very similar on balance, and I don't think that it's unfair for the investor that he gets paid less if he's in the Northeast versus the Southeast in those locations.
Gotcha. Any final words of advice or any other topics we have not covered yet so far?
No, I think you and me have been saying the same message from day one, and this gives me increased confidence in sticking to that message, and that is build high quality participant and provider-led homes. The 2-participant home, I think, is still the flagship product. It's our flagship product. It's the one that we do most of. And I think that this report confirms that that's probably the one that we should be doing the most of. We are still in the main moving towards designing to a HPS standard, fully understanding that we may not get to HPS. However, accepting that it gives us the largest access to a participant base, plus it allows for people, which is many, many people with disabilities, to be able to move in and have the confidence that they won't have to leave their dwelling should their disability get worse, right? One other thing.
Sorry to interrupt you here. So are you saying that all of your designs from now on and packages will be all HPS or a mix of IL versus HPS?
Yeah. Look, so we will do, if we can do HPS, we'll do HPS. So let's be clear. When can we do HPS and when can we not do HPS? There are different design requirements for HPS and IL. Such as, the width of the corridors, the size of the parking space, the gradients of the land, all the rest of that, yeah? Sometimes on a particular site, you actually can't design, or it's very difficult to design a HPS dwelling. So in those situations, maybe an IL is a great outcome. So we are designing to the best standard that is practical for that particular site, yeah? We are definitely not trying to save 50 grand by eliminating fire sprinklers, because it's not our philosophy. Our philosophy is to do the best possible. Sometimes the best possible is a really good quality 2-participant IL home. And I'll give you some examples where that may be the case. So you may be aware that there are very specific gradients that are required from the front of the property to the entrance. Yeah. With IL and robust, you can actually, if you can't achieve the gradient from the front of the property, you can have a level entry from the garage. So what that allows is you can deal better with slopes. In a HPS, you just simply couldn't do that. You'd be digging out too much soil or trying to add too much soil, and then you'd have all these other kinds of problems. So that's what I mean. You design the best product for that particular location if you believe that there are participants there. The other thing is, with these increases in income, what this will do is it will give us access to far superior locations than we previously had access to, and still be able to generate a commercial return for our investors. Now, I know that some investors are targeting a 20% return, and if they get it, good on them, right? That's probably too good to be true. And what they will find is, in the short term, they'll probably do well, and in the medium term, they'll get too much competition in those areas, and in the long term, their product will probably be vacant, right? So what we're encouraging people to do is take this income now design the best commercially sustainable product in the best commercially sustainable location that is available, and let's build something that's fantastic that someone will just really enjoy living in, and that might be different, right? So yeah, that's how we're approaching it, and most of them will probably still be HPS. There'll be a number of new locations where the size of the lot or the narrowness of the lot just prohibits HPS, in which case we'll design specifically to IL. And as I mentioned earlier, we're getting an enormous amount of inquiry and demand from providers who just cannot find suitable accommodation in the robust space. So we'll continue to do our best to serve those providers as best as we can.
So you'll be focusing on villa robust designs there?
That seems to be what people need. Yeah. Like I said, we are, in the truest sense, doing our best to be people-led, participant-led. Yeah? Participant-led isn't just whether you've got a particular person that is going to move in. Participant-led means that your entire philosophy of design and construct and selection of location is driven with the number one consideration is the needs of the participant, which I think if you look at our very, very first podcast, that was what you and I both said is probably the most important thing, right? Is think about the person who's going to live in these and design it for them, because they're the ones who matter, right?
Exactly. And that's why a lot of your designs are really wonderful. They've got courtyards, fire sprinklers, class 3, they're in unique areas.
Yeah.
It's very important that the product stands out, I'm sure.
Absolutely. Yeah. And just think about what a month of vacancy will cost you, or 2 months of vacancy will cost you in these dwellings now. Yeah. So the cost of quality in the long term, I think the cost of not having quality in the long term is too high. As far as I know, we still are the only builders that are doing 2-participant, class 3, fire sprinklered homes that are above, that exceed all of the SDA requirements in terms of their sizing and turning circles and all the rest of that, and have private courtyards. As far as I know, we're the only builder that's providing that product in the Perth market. There's other builders who are doing class 1. There's other builders who, on the same lot size, for example, are providing a 3-participant home. But, I think we just stick to our guns at this point and know that we're definitely on the right path.
Great. Any of our listeners who are interested in finding out more about SADHANA and their philosophy, please look at the last 4 or 5 episodes with regards to our discussions with Angad Singh here. We have a handful of stock, both 1-part contracts for SMSF friendly and also 2-part contracts for normal purchases around the Perth market. We look forward to getting your inquiry and talk to you more about how Angad and his team can help you out with your interest in this and go from there. Angad, any last comments before we hang up?
No, brother, that's it from me. Thank you very much. Thanks for having me again.
Thank you very much, mate. Bye-bye.
Ciao, brother. Bye-bye.
We hope you enjoyed this episode. Please make sure you are subscribed and following us so you can keep in the loop with all of our upcoming episodes. We would really appreciate it if you could leave us a 5-star rating, a written review, and to share this podcast with those that could benefit. Until next time, catch you on the next episode.